Hello, everyone.
Greetings. In the last segment of the cost of discipling, we are talking about the dangers of hyper-specialization or specialization of any kind, that you get to know more and more about less and less. And that means you sacrifice depth for breadth. No, the opposite. You sacrifice breadth for depth. Now, both are bad ideas. Don't sacrifice. But in an age where even Bible scholars are no longer Bible scholars, when they're John scholars or Luke scholars or Genesis or Torah scholars or something. When in that type of environment, academic environment, it's very hard to be broad enough in your sympathies or in your reading to be very effective in areas other than your specialty. But even though we've said that, there's a danger to specialization and therefore to the modern form of the academy or the seminary. There's also a great danger to not having discernment ministries, which means people who are very broad, and that tends to be the people in discernment ministry. They have a lot of interest, but they're not particularly deep in any area. As we'll get into in these details, they're not deep, for instance, in the original documents, original sources.
Yeah.
They might be deep in discernment, let's say on Mormonism or Islam or Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're not deep in theological discernment, and certainly not in biblical depth.
Yeah.
So there's a cost. So the point is, here we're talking more about the danger to the person in discernment ministry of not having sufficient tools or knowledge in your toolkit.
Yeah. Being too narrow, too, in just what you're looking at.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll get into that right now. I'm going to be reading from the screen. The evangelical printing presses of North America overflow with the efforts of so-called discernment ministries. This literature, especially concerned as it must be with the errors of heterodoxy, is particularly susceptible to the inherent vulnerabilities created by this era of hyper-specialization.
I think you should probably define heterodoxy.
Heterodoxy, well, in discernment ministry, you're dealing with wrong teachings. So you tend to read a lot about wrong teachings and sometimes the sources of the wrong teachings.
So orthodox, that
right teaching
is right teaching, whereas a lot of times you say orthodox and people think orthodox religion.
Yeah.
So we're just talking about the word and what it means.
Yeah, and when we talk about the danger of hyper-specialization, we're also talking about what is very evident now, 35 years after we got into discernment ministry. And I should tell a little anecdote about that, because we got a wake up only a year or so after we left the Watchtower. We were at a special seminar in early church history, and it was hosted by a Baptist minister who was also a librarian of the seminary. And when he found out we were in what he would call parachurch ministry, discernment ministry, without any kind of umbrella, church umbrella, he said, well, parachurch ministry, i.e. discernment ministry, is not in the Bible.
It's
So
unbiblical.
we didn't know how to respond to this.
Yeah.
But keep that in mind, that the lack of support for parachurch ministries in a lot of churches, including the two that we were part of for over 25 years, the lack of support for that has resulted in a further dumbing down of what was already a dumbed down Christian culture in the 1980s and 90s. So if you want to know the cost of not discipling people properly and not having discernment ministries, not encouraging them.
Yeah, so that was a kind of shock for me. And I kept thinking, well, I'm an ex-witness, and it wasn't because of what you were doing that I'm an ex-witness.
The churches, that is.
Yeah, the church. So why are you now making it hard for people who want to reach the same kind of people, who are kind of out of reach of Christian evangelism, simply because there's so much pre-work that has to happen, or knowledge of what it is that stumbles them up?
That's right. So in the book Chaos of Cults by Jan Carl von Balen, he made the point 90 years ago that the cults are the unpaid bills of the church. Now, we didn't see any acknowledgement of that in the churches we were attending or knowing about through our book ministry and discernment ministry. So if they're the unpaid bills of the church, then you owe a lot to the people, and owe a lot to the people who can do something about this, and they tend to be very specialized. So back to specialization in terms of Christian ministry. To be an expert in Islam, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism, the New Age, means that you must make a trade-off in knowledge. What must one sacrifice in exegetical and theological expertise to become a recognized expert in discernment ministry? Well, to be at all qualified for such a role, one must be well acquainted with dozens of critical works on cults, comparative religion, worldviews, apologetics, and dogmatics. If the expert goes a step further, as he inevitably must to be a credible witness in, say, cult research, and acquaints himself with the source materials of the groups he's critiquing, we add to his workload necessary familiarity with at least dozens of primary source documents. And we should add here that that was the reason a lot of people came to our ministry in the 90s anyway, for help, because we got inquiries from reporters, from journalists, from documentarians about,
and the
because
media.
the media were very interested in cults at this time, because they were seeing, well, they saw, this is long before 9/11, they saw the happening in Oklahoma, the bombing in Oklahoma, and they had seen David Koresh's the eruption of that story. So they were all asking, where can we go to get more information about cults? And they would come to us, and when they came to the store, especially when they came into the office, they saw 10,000 books on the shelves. And then they realized...
So at the back of our book and record shop, we had a library of 10,000 volumes specifically on religions.
Not all cults.
So, but we had source materials, so the group's own writings and critiques by former members, by never been a member, just researching the information. And I think that that did us a good service, in that those people, when they came, were impressed by that.
They weren't necessarily Christians, but they were impressed by the fact that some Christians were looking at both sides.
And so I'm not saying that we wanted to be, get people to be impressed about us, but they were impressed enough that it gave us sort of a credibility. They thought, well, you're not just looking at the beefs of people who left groups. You're looking at their own materials, and then critiques of their work by all kinds of sources. And so I think that got an ear from that source, which was not expected. Even we got a little pushback on that. Don't go to the media; they're gonna abuse you.
The spirit in the air in evangelical circles at those times was, well, we can't expect anything from the world. They're the world. That's Satan's domain. It was kind of like being a Jehovah's Witness again. Everything else is satanic except us. And when you came to our in that library, you could see right away that both sides would get a fair hearing. That is going to our point here in the paragraph, namely that the expert, if he goes a step further and goes to the original source documents, primary sources as they're called, well, that's the best kind of expert. So we were trying to do that, and our friends in the ministry were very supportive, even if a lot of people in church didn't get it. With such a research burden, what time does the discernment expert, though, have left for the most necessary tools of all true ministry? That is, intimate knowledge of the Old and New Testaments, history, historical theology, and the history of ideas, that is, philosophy and hermeneutics, the science of Bible interpretation. At the cutting edge of discernment ministry, truly the expert knows more and more about less and less. In short, he sacrifices breadth for depth, scope for specificity, understanding for knowledge. But to sacrifice understanding for knowledge, or more precisely data specificity, is also to sacrifice what the Bible calls wisdom. The name Solomon has become synonymous with wisdom, yet Solomon was no specialist. 1 Kings makes clear the reason Solomon's wisdom became renowned to the ends of the earth, it says. He spoke 3,000 proverbs. This is all, by the way, from 1 Kings chapter 4, the end of that chapter. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, that is, those practical and theological insights contained in the book of Proverbs, And his songs were 1,005. And he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals and birds, of creeping things, and of fish. When the Lord answered Solomon's prayer for wisdom, clearly the answer the Lord gave was not limited to an unprecedented grasp of the law of Moses and the history of Israel. In other words, a knowledge of the Bible as it existed 3,000 years ago. It was not theological wisdom only which brought the educated and prominent of all nations to Jerusalem. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart like the sand of the seashore. Solomon's wisdom gave him something transcending knowledge, even intellectual understanding, and that was largeness of heart. That which we would call sympathy, compassion, was even more important to the biblical concept of wisdom than the acquisition and organization of facts.
I think another danger that we became aware of, well, dangers may be a little strong, but that people who are in these kinds of discernment ministries oftentimes become so focused on the materials of the group that they're critiquing. Even if they're reading source material, I can tell you that can be very depressing.
Sure.
Reading the Watchtower always gets me riled and discouraged and frustrated, because you think, wow, there's so many things to either unravel or to show what's wrong with it. So it can be a really hard, heavy thing on the heart of people in discernment ministry. So they have to be careful that they don't spend all their time in negatives.
Yeah.
Make sure you're feeding yourself so that you have the building up of your own faith.
Yeah. We saw right away, within 2 or 3 years of getting into this ministry more or less full time, we saw the biggest single negative for a lot of the people already in the ministry before we came along was that they spent so much time in these negative areas, researching Mormonism, Islam, Jehovah's Witnesses, occultism, that was a big one. Theosophy, the New Age movement was very active in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and it's somewhat faded now, but on the other hand, New Ageism has infiltrated the general culture, so it's not gone away. You just have to see the historical roots of some of this stuff. And some of these people were very good at that, but you saw right away that they weren't particularly deep in the Bible itself.
Yeah.
Which might explain why they never got through to us when we were Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's right, because you have to be comfortable in the Bible itself and where that person's going to take you in the Bible. So when it comes to witnesses, they're going to give you proof texts, so you have to know those proof texts, but you also have to know where it's taken from.
Yeah.
What is it all about, that passage of scripture that they're using? Because they won't know, they'll just know the proof text.
So what's the biblical answer to the man, the Baptist minister who said to us, parachurch is not in the Bible? What's the answer biblically? Well, this is in the Bible, 1 Peter 3:15. Know how to give an answer to everyone who asks of you the hope.
And
ask of you the reason for the hope that you have. That involves, for every Christian, therefore, the responsibility of apologetics. That's where the word apologia actually is in the New Testament, one of the few places.
And Paul said he became all things to all people. So he was willing to get into the mind of the person he was trying to reach. He had to understand their point of view.
He knew how to do it.
Yeah. And that's what you need to do if you're going to reach people outside of your own culture or your own framework. You have to understand their point of view.
So what's the net result of 35 more years of dumbing down of church community? A dumbed down culture.
More cults.
And more cults.
Yeah.
And more confusion.
Yeah.
So if we don't want to contribute to the further dumbing down of church and further dumbing down of the culture we're all part of, we will be apologetically oriented. We will want to know the reasons for why we believe what we believe.
We're living in a world where you don't just have one framework. people have all kinds of their own frameworks from their culture and their religions.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have to understand where they're coming from and why they think and believe and do the things they do. You have to at least understand it if you're going to be able to communicate what you believe.
And these things take not only time, but the best resources, because not all the good resources in discernment are good. Some of them are, shall we say, charitably counterproductive, I guess is a way to think about it.
Yeah.
So do we have a link?
Yes. One other point, we mentioned that when we started up our ministry, we called it Apologia, Home Missions to New Religions. And that was because we could see in the church they're very keen on overseas missions, but there's so much need where you're living that seems to maybe people are more aware of that now because they've seen the results of years and years of all these new things coming in.
And culture clash, inevitable.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, we called it home mission because we wanted to make the point for people who knew about what we were doing that this is a big responsibility on the local church.
Yeah. Yeah. We should be prepared to help.
It's not got better in those 35 years.
So we're going to link to He Gave Teachers, a video, the first of 2 videos about that.
How I Left the Watchtower and Landed Softly, right? Part 1.
And One Wonders, we'll put that our website in the description so you can go and find the document for that.
Okay.
He Gave Teachers, which is in there, which lists hundreds of teachers that can be helpful to you.
Yeah, the document has at least 120 listed in it that I don't get to in the video.
Yeah.
But you can find that list and a little bit about each of the teachers that have blessed us over the years.
Yeah.
But also there's 1,600 videos in our He Gave Teachers playlist, right?
Yeah, so we'll link that as well.
Where we publicize hundreds of teachers in addition to the ones that are in the book, but also are in the document, but also thousands of their books.
And give you sample readings from those books.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
See you next time.